Alright guys, MTech Guy here, and in today's video we're going to have a chat about why I love the SMG III gearbox. Now this is something I get asked about quite frequently, and it might sound contrary to what a lot of people would think when they're looking at getting into one of these cars when there's a manual transmission available also. And you know, me saying that I love the SMG III gearbox over a traditional 6-speed manual gearbox might be the uncool thing to say, and maybe that makes me an uncool misfit, and that's fine with me. Alright, so these cars primarily came with the 7-speed SMG III gearbox, but in North America they were available with a traditional 6-speed manual also. Alright, so before we go any further, I think it's worth mentioning that I grew up over in the UK, in England, spent most of my life over there before moving over here to New Zealand about 12 years ago. Now, the majority of the cars in the UK are manual transmission. So unless you're driving a Jaguar or a V8 5 Series or something like that, 90% of the cars over there are manual transmission. So when I was growing up, it's not like there was a great deal of choice, that pretty much everything was manual transmission, you know? So that's what you drove. It wasn't like you had a choice between auto or manual. Everything was manual. That's all I've ever known when I was growing up, and for the majority of my life I've driven manual transmission cars. And back over in England, when I was younger, I also owned a few American muscle cars, and a lot of them were manual transmissions, which were super rare. You know, ZF 6-speeds, Borg Warner T10s, now that's a gearbox. You shift gears on one of them, it feels like you're changing settings on a milling machine or something. Talk about mechanical feel, awesome gearbox. And then of course, when I moved over to New Zealand, I found that it was the opposite. The majority of the cars were automatics, and when I went out looking for an E46 coupe, 330ci, I couldn't find a manual transmission one. I ended up getting an automatic one. My preference would have been a manual, but you know, the automatic worked out alright and it served its purpose. That was a daily driver that I used for about 9 to 10 years, so yeah, it worked out alright. But anyhow, what I'm getting at is when I say that I love the SMG III gearbox, I'm not saying that from a naive perspective that I've only really been exposed to automatic transmissions. You know, the majority of my life I've always had a manual transmission, so certainly not the case. And of course, being a car enthusiast, you often get on the forums and whatnot, and you often see the argument being made on there why a traditional manual gearbox is way better than a traditional automatic transmission with a torque converter. And I know, I get it. Of course, if you drive a car with a traditional manual transmission, it's going to make for a much more engaging drive. But I've noticed that often this argument comes with an air of superiority, almost like it comes with this bravado macho, yeah, well, I've gone for a manual transmission, you know, almost like that elevates the individual. I don't know, it's something I've picked up on, and I don't get it, because it's like, back in the UK, my mother, she's in her 70s now, she drives a little Fiat 500, it's manual transmission, she's only ever owned manual transmission cars. Does that make her some badass hardcore car enthusiast? Not really, so yeah, I don't know, when that argument's made with that macho bravado behind it, I don't really get it. But anyhow, back to the M5. Now this 7-speed SMG III gearbox, this was designed specifically for this platform, for the M5, the M6. So these gearboxes are very unique and very specific only to this platform. And on the other hand, the 6-speed manual gearbox they made available in North America was sort of like an afterthought. That was just to satisfy the customer base there. They made a lot of noise on how they really wanted another manual M5 as the E60 came out. So to satisfy that market, they took the 6-speed manual gearbox from one of the other BMWs and used it in this car. Now, alright, it works, and it works alright, but it's certainly not matched to the engine the way the 7-speed SMG gearbox is. The S85 V10 engine and the SMG III 7-speed gearbox were designed specifically to work together. Now when you go for one of these cars with a traditional 6-speed manual gearbox, it's not matched perfectly to the S85 V10 the way that the 7-speed SMG III gearbox is. So although the 6-speed manual makes for an awesome engaging drive, if you drove it back to back against the SMG III, you'd find that the 6-speed manual's ratios are just slightly off, just not perfectly matched to the V10 like the SMG III is. So if your preference is for a traditional manual, that is a compromise that you're going to have to consider when going into it. Okay, so as I've talked about in previous videos when I've described the SMG gearbox, although it can be driven in sequential mode, automatic mode, it's not a traditional automatic transmission, so it doesn't have hydraulic fluid and a torque converter to change the gears and transmit the power. So the SMG is a manual gearbox, not a transmission. has a proper clutch, a single clutch, and the clutch actuation is made via a hydraulic pump. So of course with the SMG you don't get a clutch pedal, the actuation's all done through the car's computer, and then the gear changes themselves are made using that same hydraulic pump with shift solenoids. So rather than the driver shifting the gears from one to another himself with his hand, although you can do it manually, it's done through the computer, through them shift solenoids using the hydraulics. Okay, so it's not a traditional automatic transmission and it's not a traditional manual gearbox either. It's like a third option, and you've got to approach it like that, with that mentality. Now if I was looking to buy an E62 M3 of the same vintage, I certainly would go for the traditional manual gearbox over the DCT. But given the choice with an E60 M5, I'd certainly go SMG III over the traditional manual. Okay, so why is that? Because a DCT is a much more sophisticated gearbox than the SMG III, certainly. So it's less sophisticated, but it's an insane gearbox. But that's what I like about the SMG III. It's such an insane gearbox, and it's so in keeping with the whole theme of this car. You know, you've got this luxury sedan saloon car, that screaming V10 up front, that high revving V10, and then you've got this insane gearbox, this SMG III, with a single clutch that will absolutely bang through the gears as fast as anything, like nothing else. The whole concept of a single clutch manual gearbox set up like that is just insane, and then the way it operates in this car with the engine is absolutely insane, and that's why I love it. That's what makes these cars so awesome. And there's so many settings with the SMG III, you can really dial it into just how you want it. So you can be screaming up a nice country winding road, really enjoying the drive. You can have the traction control off, your EDC suspension on a firm setting, give you that awesome handling. Have the SMG in manual mode on that 5th or 6th shift setting, you'll be banging it through the gears, having an awesome time. Got the engine set in 507 horsepower, you hear that thing screaming, beautiful. And then you might be coming out of the countryside into a built-up area, a town or city, and then you can knock that power back to 400 horsepower, turn the traction control back on, knock your EDC suspension back down to a nice comfortable setting, and then knock them shift settings down to maybe the 3rd setting, just a nice compromise there. Maybe put it in automatic mode, and you can just cruise nicely at slow speeds in comfort. So although the car and the SMG gearbox can be driven right on the edge, right at 10 tenths, you can also wind it right back, so it's a nice comfortable cruiser, nice smooth shift settings, lovely. And you know what? The SMG gearbox shifts so fast, it shifts like nothing else. I can't remember how many milliseconds it can shift, but it's way quicker than a human can shift, that's for sure. And look, don't get me wrong, I love a manual transmission and I love taking them cars up through the rev range, banging it through the gears myself. But this car, with this SMG III gearbox, is on a different level. It shifts so fast, and I've got my shifting down and I can bang it through the gears as quick as I like, but nowhere near as quick as this computer can shift with this SMG III transmission. And a traditional manual gearbox makes for a really engaging drive, but this thing, like I say, it's on a different level. It's just absolutely insane. When you get high up in that rev range, when you get doing some decent speeds, and you've got the SMG in manual mode, in that 5th or 6th shift setting, it changes absolutely insane. It's so fast and it's so brutal. It's just crazy. Like, I often think to myself, oh geez, you know, like it almost feels like the transmission's going to jump out the transmission tunnel. Like, this computer is no pussy when it comes to changing gears. It just does not muck around. So it shifts so fast, it shifts so brutal, and when you're really getting on it, it makes for a hell of an exhilarating drive. And it's certainly on a different level to a regular manual gearbox, that's for sure. But it depends what you want, you know. These cars are a very unique car with a very unique engine and a very unique gearbox if you go for the SMG III. And that combination makes for one hell of a drive. Now, if you're looking at getting into one of these cars and you're just hardcore manual, you know, that's what you've always had, that's what you've known, that's what you love, all I can say is give it a try. Go and drive some SMG III cars too, and give it a chance, you know, especially even in automatic mode. Give it a chance to let the adaptions adjust to your driving style, and also when you're driving it, don't drive it like an automatic. Like I've said in previous videos, you've got to keep in the back of your mind that there's a clutch actuation going on. So if you keep that in mind, when you're operating the throttle in sequential automatic mode, it can give for a very smooth automatic gear change. Now, it's not going to be like a, say, 8-speed ZF automatic transmission, nothing like that, but I'd say it does change in automatic mode almost as smooth as a, say, an old GM TH350 automatic, so that's not bad to say that it is actually a manual gearbox underneath it all. And then of course, get it in manual mode, get up in that rev range and bang it through the gears, and then you make your own mind up. Okay, so I think what I'm trying to say here is these gearboxes are very unique. They've got a lot of character and they've got so much charm, and that's why I love the SMG III gearbox. So it's definitely worth keeping in the back of your mind just how many components make up an SMG gearbox and how there's a much greater potential there for things to go wrong. It's going to be a much greater upkeep, there's going to be more costs involved, so definitely worth keeping in mind. But look, everybody's different, everybody's going to have a different opinion. That's my opinion, but it's something that I get asked about quite frequently, is why I love the SMG III so much. Alright guys, so there we have it, that's why I love the SMG III gearbox. Let me know in the comments below if you own one of these cars and what you reckon to the SMG III. If you found the video interesting, don't forget to give it a like, and make sure you check out the rest of my channel for more M5 content. Consider subscribing if that's your cup of tea. I'm MTech Guy, thanks a lot for watching.